And in that place, I remember thinking, if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light will spread.
I've been able to partner with Mind Valley to present you guys free master classes between 60 and 90 minutes covering mind, body, soul, relationships, and conscious entrepreneurship, taught by spiritual masters, yogis, spiritual thought leaders, and best-selling authors. Just head over to nextlevelsoul.com/free. I'd like to welcome to the show, Rob Gentile. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, brother. I really appreciate it. I was made aware of your book, Quirks of Light, a near-death experience story, and I'm fascinated with your story. We've had a lot of near-death experiencers on the show before, but everyone is different, and everyone has unique. There are some common elements, but how they affect the soul that's going through that transition is different for everybody. And I think we can pull ideas and we can pull lessons out from everyone's experience. So my first question is, what the hell happened, sir?
Bad luck. That's what happened.
Or good luck, depending on how you look at it.
Well, good luck in the end for sure. But, when it happens, of course, you think it's bad luck.
Sure.
So I'll start with how it all began.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, and in the steel industry. I grew up in the steel business and worked in the mill, and a lot of my family's still back there. But anyway, I live in North Carolina now, but I had some bone spurs on my neck from sports injuries when I was younger. And there was this famous doctor that is in Korea, that came from Korea. He's in Pittsburgh, and developed this new technique where they go in through the front of your neck and they drill out these bone spurs. So they just go in, they make a small cut, they move your esophagus aside, they go in, they drill these things out, no big deal. You're in the hospital one night and you're released. So I went up there, I had that done. And this was in January of 2016. Mm-hmm. So 4 days later, I came home and had a massive heart attack in my bed at around 11 p.m.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's great. So in retrospect, now we know what happened is that I threw a blood clot, or a piece of plaque broke off. They're not exactly sure, but it went right into my widowmaker, and boom, of course, everything stops. So I didn't know what was going on. My wife, we have a special needs child who has a seizure disorder, and it's 11 o'clock at night. You're asleep. All of a sudden, there's all this screaming in the house, and it's me screaming in pain. Don't remember any of this. So my wife runs down the hall to check on Maria, and she's fine. And, she's confused, turns on the light, and there I am flopping around in bed like a fish screaming. Don't remember any of that. She calls the ambulance, and thank goodness the hospital's like 3 miles away from our house. So neighbor comes over to watch Maria. I'm wheeled into the emergency room, and they know that I'm having a massive heart attack. So they hook me up. They give me some, whatever it is that they give you, blood thinners and things to calm me down. It's the middle of the night. They call the cardiologist. He's not in the hospital. So my wife and nurse are in a room, and she says, "Hey, look, we've got him calmed down. He's okay right now until the cardiologist gets here, and he's stable." As soon as she said that, as my wife says now, and I detail that in the book, it was like a moment from the movie The Exorcist. All of a sudden, I sprang up off the gurney from my waist up, like somebody grabbed me by my shirt and just pulled me forward with great force. So I'm unconscious. I spring forward like this. My eyes pop wide open, and I scream out the name Frosty. I scream out Frosty, and I collapse backwards on the gurney. Boom, I flatline. Code blue rings out through the hospital, and in rush a team of doctors to start working on me. Now, before the doctors take my wife out of the room, my wife turns to the doctor, who is now a very good friend of mine, a little beautiful Indian woman named Dr. Patel. And she turns to Dr. Patel and says, look, you have to save my husband. We have a special needs child, and she's not going to make it without him, and I can't do this alone. So she takes my wife out of the room. My wife drops to her knees, starts praying out loud to God to save me, and Dr. Patel starts working on me. Well, Dr. Patel and her team did everything. I'm talking about, the paddle shocks. I got 4 injections into my heart with the needle of epinephrine, sternal rubs, the whole thing. I was flatlined for 20 minutes. So during that period of time, the cardiologist finally arrives. Dr. Patel, for some reason, she should have called it long ago, because, after a while, they think you're brain dead. But she kept on working on me. Something compelled her to continue to work on me. And she obtained a slight pulse. Dr. Bajwa comes in, the cardiologist, puts a pump up through my thigh, finds the blockage, puts 2 stents in my heart. But it was too late. I'd gone into cardiogenic shock. Another doctor comes in, who's a friend of mine now, Dr. Carson, comes in, intubates me. I'm on the vent, and I slip into a 4-day coma. So that's how it all began. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for allowing me to rehash my entire wonderful time I had. Okay,
Yeah.
so they say anything over 5 minutes, 7 minutes, you're vegetable, right, or something along those lines.
I don't know, Alex, I don't know what that timeline is, but I know 20 minutes. It's like,
you're mush at that point. If you're not getting oxygen to your brain, technically, and again, I've heard this story play out a few times in the show, but scientifically, if that happens, the brain is pretty much mush. If you do come back, you're a vegetable. So now you're in your 4-day coma. What happens while you're in your coma?
Well, so as you say, they think that I'm probably brain dead. So, and I don't know how this works, but they send in neurologists during this 4-day period. And ironically, one of those neurologists, world famous Dr. Corbier, Dr. Jean-Renal Corbier, who happens to be my daughter's neurologist. My daughter has Rett syndrome, very rare. He comes in as well to see if I'm brain dead. But, nobody can really determine that. My oldest brother drives down from Pittsburgh. I was raised Catholic. He calls the local parish priest. Parish priest comes in, gives me my last rites. In the Catholic faith, it's called extreme unction. You only get it once in your lifetime. So he comes in, anoints me with the oils, gives me my last rites. Everybody goes home. And on the 4th day, my doctor says, look, tells my wife, we can't wait any longer. It's 4 days now. We're going to take out the vent. If he starts breathing on his own, we'll see what we got, So obviously they start pulling the tubes out. I start choking, and here I am. So I go into recovery. The first person that I see is Dr. Bajwa, but I'm still kind of like unconscious. He's like shaking me, how are you feeling? Who's a Sikh, by the way. So he's got this purple headdress on. I'm looking up at this guy. I think I'm, watching a movie. I don't know what's going on. Everything's still blurry. But my wife comes in. She's the first one that enters the room. And she says, I'm talking like a child in this high-pitched rush, voice. It was Frosty. It was Frosty, your brother Frosty. He came to me. You have to believe me. You have to believe me. And she's like, calm down. I know Frosty came to you. I said, what are you talking about? She said, right before you flatlined, you came up on the gurney, sprang forward, screamed out Frosty's name, and then collapsed backwards. And then boom, flatline. So to give you a little bit of history there, so Frosty is the nickname of my wife's brother. And unfortunately, Frosty had passed by suicide 7 weeks prior to the night that I died.
Okay.
So Frosty lives in this small country town. He was living with his parents at the time, which is about 35 miles south of where I live. And he had, it was around Christmas time, and Frosty was going through a divorce. He was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house. And Frosty had some issues. He had some drug addiction things going on, but he had been clean for like 5 years. But, end of the year, and he had his own business, surveying business, and his, trying to figure out how to pay college. His daughter's got one child, her bills, and a lot of stuff going on. So he went out to try to blow off some steam, got some kind of drug that drove him mad for like 40 minutes and came home and unfortunately took his own life. So his mother calls me in the middle of the night. She said, "Come down here, please. And can you go up into the bedroom and try to find a note or a journal or something that would give us a clue as to why Frosty did this?" So I did. I went up into that bedroom 7 times, picked through a rather gruesome scene, unfortunately. And finally, on the 7th trip up, I did find a journal, which I had given to the family. But anyway, so my wife said, "Tell me exactly what Frosty said to you." And Frosty said to me, "I've made a big mess out of things, but I want you to go back and help clean things up. But tell my parents I'm in a good place." So that was very curious to me, having been raised Catholic, and the whole, I'm 62. So back then it was a mortal sin. And, you went to hell, your soul was condemned, all these things. And so that was like the first big paradigm shift, the spiritual shift that took place in my mind that, hey, something's not right here. I mean, hell's not a good place, And it was kind of curious because Melanie had told me that what was going on at that moment is that she was screaming to me, "No, no, 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 don't go to Frosty. Don't go to Frosty. Stay here with me." Because, I've read it over and over again, and my wife actually has experienced it. I've experienced it with my mom during her passing, that a spirit comes to welcome you and ease your passing to the other side. That's very, very common. So she thought that Frosty was coming to ease my passing into the spiritual realm. Mm-hmm. It was kind of interesting. She was just like pleading, for me to stay there with him. So that's the first thing that happened coming out of coma. Now, there was another experience that I had, which was really interesting. So on the second day coming out of coma, I didn't know it was Dr. Patel at the time. This lovely Indian woman walks into my room, and she pulls up a chair and sits down, and she introduces herself. "I'm Dr. Patel. I'm the one that was working on you that night." And she got very emotional. I can't tell you how many times I almost lost you, and this is what we went through. And my arms were paralyzed at the time, by the way, for like 3 or 4 days coming out of coma. So she reached down and put her hand on mine, and she all of a sudden got very emotional, and she started talking about her father. I thought that was very odd. And she said, "I have to tell you something. My father and I were so close. He helped me get through medical school, and we almost knew each other's thoughts. Every time I was thinking of him, he'd call, vice versa, and we were incredibly close in spirit." And she said, all he was living for was to see my first child. And she said, "I was pregnant with my first son, and he just couldn't wait to see my son's face. But then unexpectedly, he had an aneurysm, and he died 6 months before my child was born." And she said, "Ever since then, Rob, I've lost faith, and I'm a very spiritual person. I'm Hindu, but I don't believe that stuff anymore. And, I've been very bitter about that whole thing." She says, "But, seeing you here alive against all the odds, there's no way you should be here. Just gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, there's something more out there." Mm. And it was in that moment that the puzzle unscrambled, and I began to put things together, because a male spirit had entered the room while Dr. Patel was working on me. And I kept hearing over and over and over again, "Keep working on him. Don't give up. You can save him. Keep working on him. You can save him." And it struck me in that moment that it was Dr. Patel's father encouraging her to continue to work on me. And interestingly enough, Alex, I couldn't tell her in that moment, because I'm thinking, hey, okay, this is the second day coming out of coma. I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. She's going to think I'm crazy. So I let it go, and I didn't tell her. And it was a year later that I met her at the hospital that I told her that story. And it's like now every year since, we get together on her father's birthday, and talk about that. So it was her father speaking through me, even though she didn't hear him, prompting her to continue working on me. So now she knows that her father is always with her, which of course, we're spiritual beings first, having a human experience. So why do we find that to be such an uncanny thing when we really should think of it as being something, usual instead of unusual? So that was my first experience, my first NDE.
Okay, so there was no tunnel of light. You didn't go into the other side during this first NED. None of that stuff happened.
None of that stuff happened. No.
Okay, so that's the first near-death experience, and you did see the spirit of your doctor's or the soul of your doctor's father come in, and he basically helped bring you back because he's the one that kept telling her, "Hey, keep working on her."
Yeah. So two things happened there, which I think kind of prepared me for what was coming, kind of prepared me for my most profound near-death experience when I almost died again. And it was Frosty that really this shift happened in me. I'm sitting there. I mean, look, I knew that my whole life had fallen apart. My arms were paralyzed. I didn't know how I was going to take care of my daughter with special needs. I mean, if I could ever go back to work, my whole life just unraveled. Everything was falling apart. But all I could think about was Frosty telling me he was in a good place. That really intrigued me. And this whole thing of, hearing Dr. Patel's father speak. So that was enough to just, lying there, I knew how catastrophic everything was. And I knew that maybe I'd never recover and that my life was over. And, how's my wife going to do this, take care of my daughter? And will I ever work again? But I was so intrigued by those two spiritual experiences that really opened up my mind, my soul. And it was my first kind of like awakening.
Yeah, there's always that one thing that happens to you in your life when you finally, and many people call it the awakening, that thing, and it could be anything. It could be when a relative dies. It could be a car accident. It could be, a child being born. It could be 1,000 different things that get you to open up and I understand that the world is more than what you see, and that we are not. We're not just this meat puppet.
No,
that we're walking around with.
No, man, no.
Because if it is, man, this is a waste of space and time. If this is it, this is all we have. That's always the way I looked at it. And I'm a fairly logical guy. And when it comes to spirituality, I've always known something, always felt something. It was always instinctual. It's never proof of anything, tangible. I was raised Catholic as well. So I was, first grade, I was like, went home. I'm like, there's a hell. I'm terrified. I'm like, can you imagine first grade? They're telling you about, for the rest of your existence, you're going to, if you eat meat on Friday, you're done. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What? So murder and eating meat on Friday, mortal sin. By the way, you don't go to church on Sunday. Literally,
you're in trouble.
I forgot who it was. I think I had a priest on or a rabbi on, and they actually checked and went back to the website to find out if it's a mortal sin. Like, no, it's still a mortal sin if you don't go to church on Sunday.
Oh, is it?
Like, it's still, you think they would update some things, but that's still, it's murder and not going to church. Equal playing field. That's what I always, even as a child, I was like, this does not make any sense at all to me. It just didn't connect. I was like, how is this a thing? How can a loving father treat their children like that? It doesn't make any sense. Like I'm a father. Never treat my children like that. I would do everything in my power to protect them and to make their life better. And even if they make mistakes, I'm not going to didn't make your bed today. Well, that's the end of you. Like, you don't do that. So maybe that's why confession was created. Right. So, that's the other thing. You're like, so
go in there and clear it all.
Clear it up. It's like a wiping of the hard drive every, whenever you go in and you're like, so again, murder. Go in, say a couple of Hail Marys, a couple of Hail Fathers, you're good. So it didn't even make any sense to me. Okay, so you had your first near-death experience. So what led to which was not too far after that, right? the second one?
Well, look, so I wake up, they tell me, hey, look, your heart's destroyed, party's over, and the only way you're going to survive is get a heart transplant. But problem is, aren't too many hearts around, so good luck with that. We'll send you to a couple of places, but hey, before you leave, here's what we have to do, because you can't even get up and walk around now. So they put me in this defibrillator vest, which kind of looks like, a Kevlar vest a policeman would wear. And what this thing does is every time your heart starts to miss a beat or get weak again, which mine was barely pumping, this thing shocks you back to life. So talk about PTSD, right? So just, every time. So I got this battery pack on my right shoulder, empowering this vest. And then they put a port in my chest. They cut me open. They put a port in my chest, and they put this medicine, which is also, I got a battery pack on my left shoulder, which is pumping this medicine on my heart every 60 seconds. It's dripping this medicine called Milrinone, which is, my doctor said, think of it as like STP for the heart. It makes the heart pump, but it starts the clock ticking. So you start running out of time because it wears the heart out really fast. So I look like this cyborg creature from
RoboCop.
RoboCop. Yeah, right. So I got this stuff, this one's flashing, this one's pumping, making this sound, spraying this medicine. So I start on this quest in the book I call it Seeking a New Heart, to find a heart. So I go to Duke University here. I go to another clinic in Charlotte. I write these guys in Florida, stem cell research. I start searching all these transplant places all over the country. Everybody's telling me the same thing. Hey, good luck, man. Get in line. We got all these people waiting for a heart. So anyways, I'm running out of time, and I go to one clinic, and they said, look, here's what we're going to do. Here's this thing called the LVAD. We drill a hole in your heart, literally. We drill this hole in your heart. We put this little pump in there, and all it does is like circulate the blood to make the heart pump the blood through the body. And you have strokes and all kind of infections and all kind of problems. But hey, it's going to keep you alive for a little bit in the hopes that a donor heart comes.
Can I stop there for 1 second? Because I have to ask you this question. Because I haven't experienced this in my life, so I want to hear what you think.
Yeah.
When you understand that the clock is ticking on your life, literally, when you said the drips there is like you're going to burn your heart out by doing this. It's kind of like you're putting NOS into your engine, and you're going to run faster, but that engine's going to blow much quicker, and it's not going to have the same kind of mileage as it is if you would just put normal unleaded into the engine. So psychologically, what is this doing to you? Like, as just a human being, like, I know you're in search of a heart, and that's basically your only purpose in life at this point, is just to stay alive. But what does that feel like for people listening to understand?
It's like getting, it's torture every day. You're tormented. You're just tormented. You're running out of time. You start thinking about, here's what you really start thinking about, which is a great question, Alex, by the way. What have I done with my life? What did I do with the time that I had here? How many people have I helped? Was I a good man? Have I done the right things for my wife and daughter, to my family, to the people that I've met in my life? Did I develop any kind of spirituality? Have I evolved into a better person? We all get caught up in, I'm still caught up in, we all are, we get caught up in making a living, paying the bills, trying to figure out what our purpose is in our life. We want to fulfill that purpose. Most people want to be the best they can be. So, this was like this clock, like you say, is ticking, is pounding in my head, and I hear it every 60 seconds. Burn, I think, squirting on my heart. Oh, you're running out of time. When's it going to blow?
Oh my God, that's awful.
What have you done?
It's like a Chinese water torture.
It's Chinese water torture. Yeah. I've never been waterboarded. It'd be like getting waterboarded like every day or every 60
seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Jesus.
It's a torturous thing to go through and to think about. So you really have to draw, strength from your inner being every second of the day to kind of like get through this. But I could tell you, it's this downward spiral because you can't sleep. You have no appetite, so you can't sleep. You know what that's like. I mean, you're sleep deprived. You're getting more paranoid. You're running out of time, and so you're just, your entire focus is on how do I find a heart? How do I survive? And that's all you think about, and everything else goes by the wayside.
Right.
Yeah. So
okay, good. Thank you. I just wanted people listening to understand what that feels like, because hopefully most of us listening don't go through things like that. But it's fascinating to me on a psychological level, like what is happening to the person going through that. And I'd imagine that's what it would be like. But like you had the added, it's not like someone told you this and you're like, you got 6 months to live. That's one thing. But you're like, no, you're literally hearing a 60-second reminder every minute of every day going, clink, clink. It's like literally a clock ticking in the back of your, right there. So that's such an intense experience. And how long were you searching?
Oh, so I did not land in Chicago until April. And obviously, it was kind of interesting. I was admitted to the University of Chicago Medicine on April 20th, the day my father died when I was 5 years old. But it was kind of like another message. Hey, I'm with you. It's going to be cool. Just hang in there. So there were a lot of, I talk about this in the book, and I've coined this phrase. I think that coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. When we really think about this and we really open ourselves up to those spiritual possibilities, and we look back on these quote unquote coincidences, they're really not. We're getting these spiritual promptings all the time. It's just that we're so distracted by the vicissitudes of life and making a living and all these crazy things that we don't really leave room for these things to enter, but they're there all the time, reminding us of who we are, that we're spiritual beings having this experience. And if we open ourselves up and we find that place, that's why meditation is so important. I was lucky because I learned how to meditate early on because I was in martial arts when I was in high school, which is where I got the bone spurs. But I learned how to meditate and silence myself, which is what I do every morning before I start my day now, and try to connect to that spiritual space that, that place where we all come from. So continue with your stories. So what happened is that I couldn't get a heart anywhere. This LVAD thing was presented to me. I told my doctors here, I think I'll just go take a walk on a beach and die naturally, because you're not going to drill a hole in my heart and put this pump in there. I researched that less than 30% of people that get the LVAD don't make it to heart transplant. So I didn't want to go down that road. So I call my boss up. This is kind of like this crazy, Hollywood moment story. I work for a privately held company based out of Chicago. I'm a sales engineer for a steel company. And I called my boss up and I said, look, I got to resign. I can't find a heart. So, thanks for everything. And he said, wait. Before you do that, let me talk to the owner of the company. I said, okay, well, I don't know what that's going to do, but I didn't realize that the owner of the company is a philanthropist, and he sits on the board at the University of Chicago Medical Center. So he calls me up 2 days later, and he said, hey, Rob, I heard about your situation. And he said, don't do anything yet. Let me just make a couple of phone calls and I'll get back to you. Calls me up and says, hey, you're going to get a call from this doctor at the University of Chicago, and just listen to what he has to say and then tell me what you want to do. I said, okay. This guy calls me up, and he's Dr. Uriel. And there's a story about him too. So Dr. Uriel calls me up. He's the head of the transplant team, the heart failure team in Chicago. And he says, hey, if you come here, I promise you that I'll transplant you within 3 to 4 months if you don't have any other big problems like cancer or some of this other stuff. I said, man, you got a deal. So my wife and I were on a plane. 2 days later, we were at the University of Chicago Medicine. So I walk through the door, and Dr. Uriel sees me, and he says, look, I have no idea how you're walking around, but we'll take it from here. So what's curious about this is there's an Indian doctor, a world famous Indian doctor there, Dr. Juvanandan, who's transplanted over 1,600 people, including his own wife. And he approaches me and he said, look, here's the deal. You're not going to make it. So I've been working on this experimental heart pump now for like 15 years. And he said, I'll tell you what it is. It's called the New Pulse. And I'll put a little slit in your chest and I'll fish this balloon pump down through your aorta and out the left side of your body. We'll drill a hole and there'll be this titanium disc. We'll sit it behind your rib cage and there'll be wires coming out, which is run by an iPad attached to this pump that's about the size of a lunchbox. And he said, this pump will pump your heart until a donor heart arrives. And I said, wow, that's fantastic, Doc. I said, well, how many people have had this thing? And he said, well, that's just it. Outside of one guy who had it in like 24 hours and he got lucky because a donor heart showed up, he said, you would technically be our first clinical trial because we've only tested this thing on cows and pigs. So he said, but you really don't have a choice. So I said, where do I sign, man? So I signed up for this thing. He said, because we need 3 weeks of data to prove to the FDA that we can move forward with clinical trials. I said, I'm in. Hey, Alex, I signed up for this thing. Best thing that ever happened. This pump is being used all over the country now. And actually people are going home with it while they wait for a heart.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really, really cool. Cool technology.
So, okay. So, all right. So now you're at Chicago. Now, when does this magical heart show up?
Well, here's what happened. And I don't want to give away too much in the book, but
sure.
enough to let you know what the story is. So what happened is that they did find another health issue in me, which was a surprise to me. At the time, I'm 56 years old, healthy guy, working out all the time, had this, freak accident. I end up here. They find this other health issue. Dr. Uriel comes in with about 5 doctors behind him. He needed an emotional support. He said, Rob, I have to tell you something. I can't transplant you. So it was a form of cancer, I'll tell you that. So he said, because you're going to be on immune suppressants the rest of your life. And, the theory is that on immune suppressants, this cancer will just explode in your body and hearts are in such short supply. The federal government won't let us waste one. So he said, it's the LVAD or nothing for you. So I wrote him this impassioned text when he left my room and, all this other stuff. So he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If I find one other person that has your condition in the country, I'll put in a request to create a special category for you and we'll see if we can transplant you. I said, okay, great. So in the meantime, while he's doing that, I'm getting weaker and weaker. I'm about 174 pounds now, Alex. So I had atrophy down to about 132. I look like a skeleton. My oldest brother described me as a wizened old man with the voice of a child. I mean, I didn't even recognize myself. So what happened is that that night, I was on the 8th floor of the University of Chicago Medicine. I had this room that faced Lake Michigan. And I'm just tired of fighting. I've been sleep deprived from 20 years of taking care of my special needs child. And I've got all this going on. I've been taken off the transplant list. I've got cancer. All these things are going on. And man, I'm ashamed to say it, but that night there was this crazy storm that came out of nowhere. It was just the wildest thing. This storm whipped up off the lake. And all of a sudden there's lightning and, these dark clouds moved in. And on the 8th floor, it's like you're like in the middle of the sky and, water is just smashing against the window. And I had like this life review, these moments of the things that I was most ashamed of and afraid of. And I became like this magnet. I was drawing in everything that as much negative energy as you could. I was like a rod for negative energy, man. And all these things were flashing through my mind. And I just gave up and I just cried out, do with me what you will. And as I surrendered myself, and I've learned that this surrender of the ego, surrendering oneself, is a very powerful thing. I've learned this in retrospect. And when I surrendered myself, that's when I was taken up. And that's when I had my second and most profound near-death experience. And here's the way I describe this. It's hard to articulate these things, but the first thing that I saw is that I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. There I was standing in the middle of nowhere. And it was almost like looking outside an airplane window on a crystal clear day. You know, you're in the air, you're looking out the window, all you see is blue. You see everything, but you really don't see anything at all. There's nothing there. And that's what the first part of my experience was like. I'm standing in the middle of nowhere. I don't see anything. But then I looked down, I could see myself in my atrophied body, in my green hospital gown with the new pulse pumping my heart, all the IVs coming out of me, all this stuff is going on. And at the same time, I could see myself standing in the middle of nowhere, perfect and whole. And I'm there and I'm saying to myself, what is going on? And then out of nowhere, I begin to hear, much like I heard Frosty's voice and Dr. Patel's voice, I began to hear things, because in that place, at least for me, I know everybody has, like, as you mentioned early on, everybody has a different experience. To me, in that place, the five senses have no functionality. In other words, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't smell anything. I didn't see angels. I didn't see Jesus Christ. I didn't see God. I didn't see anything like that. All I can say is it was almost as if I was connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. It was almost as if the grains of my being were made of sand, and someone picked them up and just threw me into this strong wind and scattered me across this infinite, timeless space, which I could not understand what it was. And I began to, God expressed concepts to me that I wholly understood in that place. I began to understand things like, I am omnipotent. This is your real identity. This is the power behind all things. This is divine source. And as those things began to come into me, and I began to understand that I was in this place, which I call the ethereal in the book, and in this ethereal space, it was almost as if I had a question about anything, all I had to do was think about it and it was answered. And I began to say to myself, wow, it's so simple. Everything here we're all connected. We're all one. It was this message of unity and oneness. And this curious thing happened to me. I saw a life review of the nurses that were taking care of me, but only the nurses that I had made negative assumptions about, which was incredible. I'm looking down and I see nurses coming in and out of patients' rooms. And I see the ones that I was most critical of and the ones that I had made assumptions about. And, we all like to think that, we're not prejudiced and we don't make assumptions and negative assumptions about people, but we do. And I saw, almost like looking on multiple television screens, the wildest thing. I began to see their lives in a regression of events. It was almost like, we know how cartoons are created. You sketch each image of the character, and then you flip those pages at high speed and it creates movement. Well, their lives are going backwards in time. And anytime there was some kind of watershed event, something like abuse or a personal choice, a poor personal choice, or a bad accident, something like that, the film would stop just for a millisecond to give me a glimpse of what had happened to that person. And about time this thing was over, it painted a portrait of who that person had become and why. And I thought to myself, standing there, how could I have ever judged these people so harshly? And then I saw my own life review, which was really tough to watch, the things that I was most ashamed of, and the mistakes that I had made in my life. And in that moment, I knew that I had to forgive myself. I forgave myself, and I had never felt so free and unburdened. And I knew that, as human beings, we can only act on the information that's available to us at the time. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's like the things that I will do at 62 now, I would never consider doing at 16. And, we make these decisions in our life, and it's an evolving process. And hopefully we're evolving towards something greater and something better all the time. But that was the first part of my experience. And then one of the most incredible things happened, and this is what the book is named, The Quirks of Light. I began to see, and this is the only way that I could, describe this. It was almost like this web of lights appeared, and it was almost as if it looked like this vast network of twinkling lights or quirks of light, sparks of light that bind us all. And it was like this beautiful tapestry woven, hanging on the ceiling of the universe, and it stretched into infinity. And the way I describe it is, it's kind of like a neuron in the brain. And we know from science class, the neuron has a nucleus, and then it has tentacles and dendrites, and they weave together. And that's how our brain functions. I've learned that a plant functions that way, a solar system, it all functions that way. It's the same design. And these quirks, by the way, are made of light. And quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And they combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. These quirks of light combine to make a person, a tree, a plant, a dog. It really doesn't matter, a solar system. And I knew in that place that this web of lights that seemed to just expand into infinity, that each one of those little nucleuses represented a life. That little spark of light, each little quirk of light was a life. And when I saw that, I realized that that's how we are all connected. And in that place, I remember thinking, if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light will spread. And it's kind of like I knew in that place that this light inside of each of us is this divine energy that we're all born with. And it connects us and binds us all, both animate and inanimate objects. We're all made from the same stuff. And I remember thinking in that place, wow, it's so simple. This is the only way the creator could have designed this. Same formula, same stuff, just creates out of the same. It's all about light. And there was this universal language spoken throughout this web. And that language was love. Love is the basis for all of it. Love and light and God are one. That's what I learned in that space. That's what I believe. And then out of nowhere, one of the most profound things that has transformed my life occurred. So in this temporal world, my daughter Maria, she has Rett syndrome. It's a lot of nasty things rolled into one. She doesn't talk. She doesn't walk or feed herself. She presents like severe autism, cerebral palsy, all these things rolled into one. She can't free herself from wringing her hands. She constantly writhes her hands. And it's a very difficult thing to struggle with, even now that I know where our spirituality comes from. But seeing it here in the temporal world is a challenge on a daily basis. But in that place, and again, there's no language there. Language, or I should say communication, is kind of like, at least my experience was, it was kind of like telepathic and synchronicity at the same time. All you had to do was think about something and you had the answer. So I'm standing there in the middle of nowhere. I'm connected to this web, and here comes Maria. My daughter comes, she appears to me perfect and whole. And she had this light emanating through her. And it's not the kind of light that you and I can see. It's not a light bulb. It's not sunlight. It's not anything. It's that divine spiritual light that animates all life. And it is just beaming through her. And she's standing there. And we've never had a conversation. And I asked her in that place, I said, Maria, I've never heard you say my name. I've never heard you say, I love you, Daddy. Your mother and I have taken you everywhere, and we don't know what to do for you. We don't know what to do for you anymore when you suffer. And she said 3 words that transformed my life. I said, what can I do for you? And she said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out in that ethereal space. And I said, I never want to leave this place. And when I said I never want to leave this place, I found myself back in my hospital bed. And that was the end of my experience.
My God, Rob, that's such a profound experience. It's unlike any of the other ones I've heard. So that is definitely a unique one. Did you die during that process, or you were just still in this state of this kind of odd state that allowed you to kind of go to this place?
Yeah, I didn't, right before that, I talk about it in the book. Right before I surrendered, my heart went into tachycardia. The nurse rushed into the room and she said, there's no reason why your heart should be in tachycardia. What's happening to you? And she put, I think, magnesium or something in my IV bag. And then she left the room. And that's when I had that dark night of the soul where I started remembering all these things, and all these things started coming to me. And then I surrendered. So I didn't, it wasn't like the night I flatlined, I could tell you that. It was a completely different experience. So I kind of cursed myself when I said, I never want to leave this place, because I ended up back in my bed. But I could tell you this much. After that experience, I really didn't care if a donor heart came or not.
Oh, because you knew where you were going.
Not only did I know where I was going, but I also knew that even though, like I said, and I deal with it on a daily basis, that I have to watch my daughter suffer here, yes. I knew perfect, and she was perfect and whole. And, there's this smirk that she does when we've been through some tough stuff these past 25 years. But there's this smirk that she gives me, particularly when she's having seizures or crazy stuff is going on. And I saw that smirk when she came to me and said, just love me. And I knew that was the clue that regardless of what's happening here, the best part of her is untouchable.
Right.
So she's perfect there. And, who would want to come back, right, to this? I mean, I knew that I had to come back to share my story. I knew I had to come back to help my wife and Maria safely to the other side. I knew I had a lot of things left to do. But in that place, when I found myself back in my bed, I really didn't care about a heart.
Right, exactly. It's fascinating how it's the more that I talk to people who have near-death experiences, and the more I do this show, I kind of, things start becoming clearer and clearer about what is on the other side. What we are truly. What I ask those questions constantly of everybody, because there's so many people searching. And I think that there's so many things happening right now in the world that is really testing us all.
Yes.
But if we have an understanding, a little bit better, clear understanding, without dogma, without fear and anger, there's a peace.
Yes.
I walk around with a knowing, and even though I haven't had a near-death experience, or I just walk around with that knowing in my mind, and it helps me go through the day.
Yeah.
This is not easy. This is not easy, and we are arguably in some of one of the best countries, quote unquote, easiest countries to be living in the world. We have water, we have roof over our head, we have food, as much food as we want to eat whenever we want to eat it. We could literally eat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if we truly wanted to, if we had so we are in one of the richest countries in the world. So there are many other people who are having much, much more difficult times than you or I have. And even with all of that, they're still so difficult to just get through the day sometimes.
Yeah. You're right.
Let me ask you a question. So you did eventually get a heart, and I don't want you to give the whole story away, but you did eventually get a heart.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a spiritual connection with the donor of that heart? Because that is such a miracle that there has to be some sort of, I hate to say the word, but karmic connection of like, Bob's heart. Bob's like, okay, what's your purpose here? I'm like, I'm going to go do my thing, but really I'm here. I'm here because I promised Rob that he was going to go through some stuff, and in this life I was going to help him out. What do you feel? Is there a spiritual connection with that donor?
By the way, you're pretty close. You're close there. You're getting it.
I'm not even an intuitive or a psychic or a channel. I just have a feeling.
Well, let me tell you, there's science behind this, and I really dig into this because it was driving me crazy. But so I really dig into the science behind this in my book.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of people don't know is that the heart has a brain. Now, when we think about it, we go back to basic physiology. The heart is the first thing that develops in the mother's womb. It's the heart that develops first because the heart has to pump the blood and the oxygen to other parts of the body so they can develop, especially the brain. So the heart develops its own brain, and I can send you tons of articles on it. They've actually located those cells in the heart. So the heart communicates with the brain first. It's not the other way around. And the heart communicates with the brain in 4 ways, basically. It communicates neurologically. It communicates biophysically. It communicates through pulse waves. And then most interesting, it communicates through electromagnetic waves, much like a cell phone. So as we develop, the heart stores a lot of our preferences, music, emotions, food preferences, all of these things. It has to, because these guys communicate. The only reason why heart transplantation works is because, when you cut somebody's heart out and throw it in a garbage can, and you put somebody else's in there, the only way that this works is because the heart has a brain and it finds new pathways to get to this guy. Okay? So somebody else's heart is stored with those memories. And, I find myself from being directed by this person more than you want to believe. Emotionally, my wife laughs at me about certain food addictions that I had the first 2 years. Like, I'm not a junk food guy, but couldn't get enough M&Ms. So
interesting.
It's like a crazy thing. One of the women we talk about all the time on my floor that got a heart like 8 months before me. She didn't know what the heck was going on. She came right out of heart transplant. She was driving the nurses crazy on the floor, craving chocolate milk, and she was making these nurses go like to the floor above and the floor below to get chocolate milk. She couldn't get enough. She was lucky enough to meet the parents of her donor, a young woman who had died in a car crash. And she asked them the question. She said, "Can I ask you a question? What's the deal with, did your daughter like chocolate milk?" And they were like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? She was addicted. We had to keep like 3 gallons of chocolate milk in the refrigerator all the time." This is something that, of course, has taken years for science to understand and prove out, instead of just, anecdotal stories that you hear from other transplants. But I can go on all day about those stories. So it's kind of interesting that, and I'll give away some of this. So I have a young woman inside me who was born 3 months before my daughter, Maria. So Maria was 20 when I got my heart. So was this young lady. And she also passed from suicide. And, you know, I have to tell you, I'm gonna circle back on something that you had mentioned, that, hey, you know, Bob's heart, and I got to fulfill this thing, and this all goes back to purpose and some of the things that we've yet to understand about a spiritual soul and all of these things that we experience. But it took me 2 years when I finally met the donor's father. We met at a Denny's, and there were all these so-called coincidences that started to unravel as we began to talk. And he brought her computer and, you know, photos and a bunch of other things. And as it turns out, this girl always wanted to work with special needs children. She had a love for special needs children. Anytime special needs children were being bullied, she'd step into the fray and protect them in high school. She was a natural-born artist who never took a lesson. And my mother, I'm an Italian immigrant. My mother, who never took a lesson, she loved to draw and was a natural-born artist. These pencil sketches, which we have her portfolio, my brothers and I. And it turns out that this woman, her name is Molly, by the way. So Molly, who spells it with she ends her name with an I, and she always circled the I as a heart. Ironically, it's on her gravestone as a heart. Molli. Molly had the exact same, some of the exact same pictures, ironically, that she drew, pencil sketched. And her strokes, the way she used black and white to tone things, just like my mother. Then to boot, the daisy was one of her favorite flowers. So she had a daisy, a stem, and 3 daisies tattooed on her shoulder. My father's favorite flower was the daisy. And ironically, there's this one picture. I never knew my father. He was killed in a steel mill when I was 5. But we had this big garden in our backyard back in Pennsylvania, and he would always plant daisies in the front row of the garden. And there's this iconic picture of him kneeling behind the daisies in front of the garden that gets passed around my family, of my father. So all of these so-called coincidences, you know, made me wonder, did Molly come out of that web where we're all connected, and was her purpose to give me a heart to fulfill her purpose, her mission while she was here? Don't know. I happen to believe it was, because now she's paying it forward through me, and she's giving me the life to continue to care for my daughter. And she's also got me speaking to a lot of different groups around the country, helping parents whose children have passed either via suicide or other things to give them some hope and healing. So, you know, Alex, I'm all in with this stuff, man. I don't think that any of this is a coincidence or anything woo-woo out there. It's all fascinating and it's a beautiful transformation.
Yeah, you know, for me as well. I mean, I you know, I always tell people, like, whether you believe it or not, it's irrelevant. I could care less. It's all about what's true to you, and what makes if it connects with you, great. If it doesn't, if it's just an entertaining story, fine. I mean, I always find a feeling that if you listen to a good story, even if you just like look at it at you know, one level, subconsciously it's kicking into another level, and they might be making effects on you that you won't even realize maybe for years later
right.
when you hear a good story, because it might not make sense to you now because you're not going through something. But like, I promise you, if someone's listening to this now and it starts to have that conversation, like, oh my God, you've got 6 months to live. I promise you, this story they're going to probably come back and listen to this story because they're like, okay, now the story resonates with me a lot more than it did when I was, you know, having a beer at a bar.
Well, I'll tell you what it teaches you. It's what it taught me. It teaches you to think about your life from the end instead of the beginning. So when we look now, what I think about now every day is I think about things from the end and bring them backwards, because that's what, like I said, that's what I was consumed the most with when that milrinone was pumping in my heart, and I was, bang, 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 you could die any minute. What have I done with my life? What is it that I'm most proud of? That I fulfilled my purpose, and that's a really important lesson that I learned through my experience, and I would hope that others would learn.
I'll tell you what, I mean, as I've gotten older, you start having those conversations in your head, like, I don't know how many more years I have ahead of me. But I don't know if I'm closer to the end than I am to the beginning anymore. I just don't know, as I'm getting close to 50. So I'm going, what am I going to do with the time that I have left? Yeah. I feel like I wasted a lot of time. I think we all, at one point, my 20s are a blur and an absolute waste of time for my physical body, and how I was like, oh, you're in such horrible shape. No, you weren't. You were beautiful at 20. You could do things at 20, even in bad shape, that you could.
Yeah, right. How about it?
Your back was fantastic.
Yeah.
Things, I couldn't tell when it was going to rain by the aches in my body when I was.
Yeah, I get it, man.
But those are the things that you start thinking about as you get older. So as you go through life, you start figuring out. I love that idea of looking at the end and looking back. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of the time that I have left? Yeah. No one's guaranteed anything other than the moment that we're hearing right now. No one at any moment, as you know very well.
Yeah,
it could all turn on a dime. It could all turn on a dime very, very quickly. So what do you want to do with the time you have here? So after you've gone through this experience, what is your understanding now of God or the creative force, that source that is everything, and it is the one that is behind all of this? What is your understanding of that now?
Well, that's a very broad question, but I could tell you that my understanding is, and I go into this in my book. There's a chapter entitled All One. It's opened my mind to, all the doctors. I was really blessed with having a doctor from pretty much every world religion take care of me. I mean, everything from Christians to Sikhs to Hindus to I mean, it was just crazy. Muslims, everybody under the sun, pretty much. And what I found, and I researched all of those world religions, and the walls that get up between, that they're put between all of these and create all these problems that we're having. But if we can only begin to understand that in their purest form, love is at the heart of all of them. And love is the universal language that the Creator speaks to everything. Nature, everything is made of the same stuff. Here's the biggest lesson, one of the biggest lessons that I learned, I tell you briefly. Because when I was I had to live in Chicago by myself in the apartment for a year after transplant, because the hospital is responsible for you. If something happens, you die in that first year, they can lose the transplant license. So I couldn't come home to my wife and daughter. You're at the most risk of infection. And it was there that I really jacked up my meditation every day. And what I was trying to do, and it was all folly, is that I was trying to get back up into that ethereal space.
Sure.
I could not come to terms with, and I was grappling with all the things that are going on in the world, like you talked about, and then this ethereal space where we're connected to everything. It's divine love and energy. And I had a visit from a guy, and I don't want to get into that because it's too long of a story. But here's what I had to figure out, is that we have to learn how to see the divine in everything. And once we learn how to see the divine in everything, we don't have to leave the earth to experience the Creator, because it's all around us. And that's, I wasted 6 months in Chicago meditating, trying to get back up into that ethereal space and then come crashing down, only to turn on the TV and see, all the things that are going on in the world. But when we connect with that divine love and energy every morning, and I'm a Christian, but now I know there's more than one way, there's more than one pathway to get to the Creator. As long as we're on that road to understanding this divine love and energy that has created everything, then we shouldn't judge others' paths to that source. Because as long as they're not harming anyone and they're in that space of oneness and trying to seek out that source of divine love and energy, then it's okay.
I was going to say that it's kind of like speaking different languages. Just because you speak Spanish or you speak French, you still communicate, and it's no language is right or wrong. It's just communication.
Perfect analogy.
No religion is right or wrong. Yeah, there might be elements, there might be dogma, there might be things that we all don't agree with, but at the core essence of religion, generally speaking, I'm not going to say all religions, but generally speaking,
right,
the greatest hits, the ones that have been around for a few thousand years, not the ones that started last week. The ones, those, they all start with love, and their purpose is to connect with God, connect with source, connect with the creative force, whatever you want to call it, the universe, whatever it is. That is the core of what most of these great old religions are about. So there's not one right or wrong. If you're born a Muslim, it doesn't make you, it doesn't make you wrong. If you're born a Christian, you're born a Jew, you're born a Sikh or a Hindu. It's all different paths to the same place. Just like communication, language, it's about communication. It's the exact same thing. We're just doing it at a different, it actually makes things more interesting. If everyone spoke English.
Yeah, right.
If everyone just spoke Spanish or everyone just spoke French or German, there's no variety. There's no. So if everybody was Christian or everybody was just a one world religion, and that was what everyone knew, and there was nothing else, I don't know. I kind of like these different aspects of things because I've also studied a lot of, world religions as well. And there's a lot of common elements, a lot of common elements in the great religions. But they all have a different flavor. Yeah, so you shouldn't judge. You shouldn't judge somebody else's path, and when I was talking to somebody the other day who was homeless for over a year, he said something so profound to me. It was so profound. And it really changed the way I look at homeless people, because now more than ever, especially living in a big city, they're everywhere. Yeah. And they have their hands out and they're always helping. And many times you're just like, there's that judgy part of you that goes, get a job. I got a job. Why? And he said, you don't understand what that person's story is. You don't understand what they're going through. They could be there for circumstances that are beyond their fault, and I've opened my to love more. And every time I see somebody's like, always walk out of the house with $5, $10, some loose change, something. So when that person does cross your path, you can give them something. And the other day, I just grabbed a $10 bill and I gave it to this lady on the side of the road. And when she got the $10 and I saw her face, she started to cry. And she went back and sat on her stoop. And she started to cry and looked at the $10, put it in her pocket, and she said a prayer of thanks to God, because that $10 to her meant so much. And to me, it felt amazing. So why is it that when we do things like that, we feel remarkable? But when we do things that are bad or negative or hurt somebody, we generally don't get that endorphin rush.
No. So that is, and one of the things that I didn't have time to get into. So this plays into exactly what you just said. When I was connected to this web of lights, these quirks, which again each quirk of light represented a life, there were some parts of the web that weren't as bright as the others. And those were places, when I first came back and I'm journaling and this is the other thing I did. I've been journaling since Maria got sick. So that really helped me. Even in the hospitals, I journaled the whole thing so I didn't have to rely on my memory, because memory, you can't rely on your memory. So the book, even though it took me 3 years to write, I was able to just pull my journals out and it pretty much wrote itself. But, those places in the web that were darker than others, where people weren't emanating this love and light, this spiritual light that comes through us all when we love. We're all born with a moral compass. We all innately know the difference between right and wrong. I don't care what anybody says. So that's why, when we do something negative, our light goes a little bit dimmer. But when we do something that loves, we illuminate the path for others as well, right? So then, if we would all do that, imagine what it would look like, this web. So I think it's a reflection.
Yeah, it's if we all meditated a little bit more, I think life would be a lot better in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you did mention missions a lot, and that's something it's a common topic I talk about on the show because so many of us are lost. So many of us feel like we aren't connected. So many of us don't know why we're here, what we're supposed to do. Yeah. What, in your experience, is a way to connect with the mission that we have in this life? Because it might take decades before you find it, or you might figure it out when you're 5. It all varies on the soul's journey. But if you're in search, most of us are in search of what is that thing that I'm here to do? What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question because listen, I had to die to figure this out. I don't want anybody else.
And you went through it. It wasn't just like a quick little boom, boom, boom. I coma out. No, it was a pounding. You went through it.
6 months before I got Molly. So here's what I think it is. We are all, and I was on another podcast a while back and somebody wrote in and said, well, most people, they don't have the opportunity. They live in grinding poverty. They have no idea what their mission is. And that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down right now. But for, in the main, like we're talking about right now, as you mentioned, for most of us, we are in search of that. And it's so important. I really believe that each one of us is born with a mission. We're born with a purpose. And we have a responsibility to figure out what that is, because that's when that light shines the brightest. And how you figure that out is that we all know innately what it is that we love and what lights us up, when we're doing it. Whether it's, for some women, it's cooking. For other women, it's being a CEO. For some men, it's playing the guitar. For other guys, it's being a great salesperson. Whatever it is that really engages you spiritually and gives you that rush, that's the path that you got to go down and just spend your life really evolving through that process, because that's your gift. And I think this is my theory anyway. I think this is why we all admire the athlete, the actor, the musician, the artist. They know what that light is. They know what that purpose is, their mission. And regardless of what happens around them, they just keep digging deeper until they perfect it, until they get there, until they can let that light shine through them. And then everyone, comes from miles around to watch them, right? And I think that is such an important role, because I've come to understand that this web that I saw in the ethereal it's a reflection of what happens here on earth. What we do here, it affects our spiritual life and vice versa. And that web, it just represents that light and dark struggle throughout all time that all humanity has dealt with. It's the same thing. That's why history repeats itself. So we've got to figure it out.
So what do you say to people who might have an inclination of what that mission is, but is afraid to walk down the path? Because you just said the actor. I come from everybody in the show knows I come from the film industry. When I said I was going to be a director, and go into the film business, I might as well have just said, I'm going to run off with the circus. I mean, it was an insanity. So there are paths that are hard, or there's no security involved. So what do you say to the people who, like, I really love playing the guitar and I want to do it for a living, but I'm afraid because I got this job as an attorney and I've built this life up around myself, but I'm not happy. I'm afraid to make that change. That happens all the time. It happened to me. It took me a while before I got comfortable doing this, as part of my expression of what I do in this world. But it took me a minute to come to grips with that. The ego had to let go and all that stuff. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, Alex, here's the thing. We have to live. I mean, we live in a temporal world where we need the basics to survive, right? I mean, we have to keep a roof over our head. We have children that have to be taken care of. We have to pay bills. We have to do certain things in order to maintain this existence, so we can continue to work on those things that we're most passionate about. For the attorney who wants to be a professional guitar player but doesn't want to leave his practice, you know what, man? He could start doing gigs at night. He can find a band to play in on the weekends. He doesn't necessarily have to give up his day job until something breaks. Because you know what? I've got friends too that are musicians, and one of my first cousins lives in New York. He's a very successful musician, but went through 10, 15 years of really, really difficult struggles to get there. But you know what? He kept the job. His parents helped him. So there are things that we can do to follow our passion, follow our dream, our mission, whatever you want to call it, without just throwing all caution to the wind, and find ourselves begging on the street, right? So we have to be responsible and take responsibility for our own actions, but it can be done. I've got friends that are entrepreneurs who they work their job during the day, they're 8 hours, and at night, they put 2 hours aside to building their own business.
I heard the story of Stephen King, the great author. And I don't know if you know the story of how he got his first book written, but he was writing it on his lap, working at a laundromat, I think he was at, and he had the typewriter on his lap and he would just type out Carrie, and Carrie was his first book. And after he wrote it, he was so disgusted by it, and everyone turned it down. Everybody turned it down.
Yeah.
He threw it in the garbage and he's like, I'm done with writing. I'm done with writing. It's over. His wife found it cleaning out the garbage, read it, and said, "You've got something here. Keep going." And they're still together, by the way. And they've been, so one of the greatest writers of his generation.
Yeah.
There's struggles. There's that adversity on finding that mission. And then once you find it, maintaining it and having the gumption to keep going and to grind it out sometimes. But if you're happy doing what you're doing, it becomes easier, but it's everyone's path is so different. Some people just, you hear these lottery ticket stories of people who's just like, I'm 20, I wrote my first this, or I did that, and I'm all of a sudden I'm a millionaire. I'm like, great. You have a different journey, a different path to walk. You have other struggles to deal with, But now I have a fairly profound question for you. And when I was prepping to talk to you, I wanted to ask you this question. Do you have a message for anyone dealing with the loss of a loved one right now? Because I know a lot of people who listen to these episodes, especially about near death, they come looking for some sort of solace. They come looking for some sort of comfort with either someone they just lost or in the process of losing. And they're trying to psychologically prepare themselves or deal with the loss that's already happened. Since you've gone through your experience, do you have a message for these people?
Absolutely. And I think that the best message, which, I've already talked about, is seeing my daughter perfect and whole And having gone through this experience of losing my brother-in-law and then, losing Molly as well, and how they've come back full circle, and particularly seeing my daughter Maria, perfect and whole, and her speaking to me, saying, just love me. People have got to understand that we're spiritual beings first, having a human experience, and that we'll see our loved ones again, perfect and whole. We'll be with them. But most importantly, they're always here with us. Spiritually, they're here with us. And it's, when we realize that we all come from the same place, we come from this divine love and light. And when we know that we go back to that collective, that we're back connected with that web, and we all become one again, and we'll see them again. I mean, if that doesn't give you hope and ease your pain and ease your suffering, I've been speaking to a couple of different groups. One of them is called Helping Parents Heal, and they're a nationwide group. Actually, they're expanding even more now. And all of them have either hired a medium in a professional medium, because I know that some people do have that gift, and they've all been able to channel their children. They've been able to channel their loved ones. And a lot of documentaries have been made about that as well. And I could just tell you that that's my message, that we're all one. We come from this divine place of love and light. Our loved ones are there in that space, perfect and whole. And I know that sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our heads around that. It's hard for us to grasp it when we're in this temporal world. But that veil is very, very thin. And I connect with it every morning through meditation and prayer. That's how I wrote the book. I'd asked for those words to come through me, not from me. Some days nothing came out. But I could tell you that if you focus on it and you find that place where you can just quiet yourself and quiet your mind and get into that space, those messages will start to come from you, come to you. I know that you'll be able to hear your loved ones. You'll be able to connect with them. And I bet you that people who are listening to this will write in and say, oh, a lot of times spirit comes through once they leave. They communicate through one of their favorite animals. They do all kind of things to connect with us and remind us, angel numbers, that they're with us and they're there. Much like Dr. Patel's father kept on pushing her to save me. Much like Frosty spoke to me and said, I'm in a good place, and my daughter coming to me. It's there. It's real. We just have to learn how to connect to it.
I'll tell you a quick story. I've said it on the show before, but I think you'll like this story. I had an aunt who died. I love this aunt. She was a close aunt of mine, and she died a few years ago. It was like 2-3 years ago. And I was 2 or 3 days after she passed. I had just been looking through some old. I was doing a project and I was looking through some old VHSs. And when I put in this VHS, I was just scanning to see what was on them. And all of a sudden, there was this video that I don't remember shooting when I was a teenager. It was like when I was first directing, and I basically shot Thanksgiving dinner at my father's house. And there she was, beautiful, young, having a good time. My grandmother was there. People that I have lost was there. They were all there. But it was just the timing was so ridiculous. It was 3 days after she passed. I was shocked. And then I filmed it on my iPhone, and I sent it out to my family so my family could see, because they were like, oh my God. So it was just this really profound moment that I was like, she used me to get this. And it was her being happy and eating, and just, it was really a fun time. And I think it was a way of her saying, everything's okay. I'm fine. Yeah. It was but it was so profound though. And I just couldn't, you just can't say coincidence. 3 days after she died, all of a sudden I grabbed the videotape that had been sitting with me for 25 years. I just happened to go through it 3 days after she passes, and then happened to find that footage that I didn't even remember existed. That's crazy.
Yep. Like I said, Alex, coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous.
Very much so. Now, Rob, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I ask all of my guests.
Sure.
What is your mission in this life now?
So my mission is I work full time as a same steel company that helped
saved your life. That saved your life.
Saved my life. So I do this on the side because my mission is to pay it forward, to tell the story. I can't tell you. Here's the most gratifying part of my life, Alex. By the way, so you know this, you don't make money writing a book unless you're, unless you're a famous author. So there's no financial gratitude there, but my gratitude comes from, I do one of these podcasts and the emails that I get from people and, the sometimes letters, people have mailed me books and saying, you saved my daughter's life. She heard your podcast that pulled her back from suicide, or I can't tell you how much this meant to me because, my son who passed away, he speaks to me in my dreams. I mean, it's been such a gratifying, beautiful experience. And I'm just getting started because I'm just now getting out there more and more. COVID has really slowed me down, but there are so many other organizations that have asked me to come in and speak and tell the story. And a lot of this was from Molly kind of pushing me forward to do these kind of things because, it's hard to find the time to do them. I got a special needs child. I got a full-time job. But to me, it is so important to get this message out because so many people are hurting. There's so many people in pain from losing a loved one, unanswered questions, not really believing this stuff until something happens catastrophic, So that's my mission.
Now, what is the ultimate purpose in life?
So for me, I could just speak for me, but the ultimate purpose for me is to grow spiritually, is to learn more and more how to connect with that love and light of the divine, how to become a better person, how to evolve more in that direction. Because, in the end, when I wrote the book, I kept an urn with not all of this, but a partial urn of Frosty's ashes to remind me that in the end, we really do just get reduced to a pile of dust. So that's all we are. Like you said, we really are just a meat stick without spirit. So it's so important for us to develop this spirituality, what I would call the spirituality of wholeness, of understanding who we are, where we come from, why it's so important, realizing that our real identity comes from God. And when we do that and learn how to see the divine in everything, it equals freedom. We're free. No matter what happens in this life, doesn't matter how much money we earn or, what kind of car we drive or what kind of position we hold, because in the end, it's all folly. In the end, our spiritual relationship with the Creator is really all we have. That's it.
And Rob, where can people find your amazing book, Quirks of Light, and find out more about the work you're doing?
They can go to my website. It's robagentile.com. You can find the book on Amazon, or you can find the book at any bookseller. It's now in any bookseller and the audiobook as well on any platform.
Rob, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience with not only my tribe, but with the world. And hopefully this conversation will help a few souls along the way. So I appreciate you, my friend.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, Alex.